Okay, so now we're going to look at how LEED, or Leadership for Energy and Environmental Design, is organized. And typically the use of the term categories is meant to help us organize all the major sustainable strategies into groups. So each rating system is made up of a combination of credit categories, and within each of the credit categories we'll have specific requirements and prerequisites that you have to meet. This all sounds pretty straightforward, but given the complexity of sustainable design and green building, you'll find that it can get very complex very quickly. And I should state here that LEED is beginning to authorize, or at least acknowledge, integrative design processes, which, by the way, we'll be covering next week in this course, and trying to bring multi-stakeholder design processes to the table to achieve sustainability. So this is not a category yet, but they're trying to promote working across disciplines to solve this. And of course, the significance is that this is emerging. IPD, or integrated project design, is emerging as the desired methodology, not just for sustainability, but for 21st century buildings that require so much more collaboration and so much more effort. I'm going to take you through the different categories, and first there is location and transportation. Later in future videos I'll be going through each credit one by one within these, but right now we're just kind of looking at the general overview of how these categories are organized. And clearly LEED would like us to build in dense areas, near diverse uses, near transportation, and certainly within development constraints. So it's really looking at site selection as critical to the overall sustainability model. And so LEED is not just about buildings, actually. It's about a whole methodology for achieving a sustainable future. We tend to think of it as a LEED Gold building, but in fact, it actually is much more sophisticated than that, as evidenced by these points, and you can get a lot of points for these, so we'll go through that. So we want you to think broader. The next category, or one of the categories, is materials and resources. Here, obviously, we're looking at waste, we're looking at resources, construction waste recycling, for example. And the significance here is going to be, when I cover the credits, is the emergence of life cycle assessment and understanding the impact of materials, not just for energy, but also for environment. And so we'll see later in future videos how that plays out in the LEED rating system. And then, of course, the category of water efficiency is critical more than ever, given what's going on with climate change. Depending on where you're living, water efficiency has all kinds of different meanings, and you'll see later that LEED now has some regional priority credits to begin to acknowledge the fact that climates really do change from place to place. And then, of course, probably the biggest category, energy and environment, or in atmosphere, certainly where you can get a lot of points. And here's where LEED deals with carbon dioxide emissions and tries to think about buildings as reducing their impact on the overall ecosystem. And then, of course, there's sustainable sites, which is encouraging us to use sustainable landscape architecture and design principles, sustainable construction principles. And I should mention that the Sustainable Sites Initiative, which we covered last week, emerged as a response to LEED sustainable sites. And now, for example, GBCI, or the Green Building Certification Institute, has now taken over certification of that. And then, of course, there's indoor environmental quality, and the significance here is that Americans especially spend more time indoors than anybody else probably in the world, 95%. And so better indoor air quality and access to daylight and views seems to be, and is, more and more critical every day. And then LEED offers some opportunities for some extra points for innovative design and construction practices, and I'll talk a little bit about those later. The significance here is that, and here we have the regional points, which has to do with LEED beginning to acknowledge the differences in climate. Now, there's our point systems here. So what we have is the number of points can determine the certification, 4 levels of certification. The good news here is you can get different levels, and that was done very, very pointedly to give corporations and large institutions flexibility in meeting low to high standards. And I think it's been a great sort of, I call it the monkey bar approach, where you can go on a low bar or you can go on a high bar, but at least you're getting on the bar. At least the conversation has started in the organization on how to be sustainable, and LEED has really built that ladder, or those monkey bars, for you to climb on. The negative of interpretation of that is, of course, people have learned how to game the system. How can I get the most amount of points for the least amount of money? And in our last course, Principles of Sustainable Design, we talked about motivations for people and how, unfortunately, we have the interlopers. And LEED, sadly enough, and it's not LEED's fault, has been designed to really close all the loopholes where people could try to maximize points and minimize effort. So here's a swatch of a LEED check sheet I don't even know if it's LEED version 4. It doesn't matter. Here I'm just trying to show you how LEED is organized. So you'll have categories like water efficiency. And these terms are really important, by the way. I should mention that everything I'm covering right now would be on the LEED Green Associate exam in some form. And so credits and strategies might be, for example, innovative wastewater technologies. And now I know for sure this is a LEED version 3 slide, so I apologize for that. And then there are prereqs. So these are things that you have to do. And if you miss one prereq in any category, you lose your entire rating system. And then I believe the lawsuits will begin. And then finally, there are points. And those points can vary from credit to credit, depending on how LEED or USGBC has weighted the importance of those, and they vary to provide some flexibility for the user. Now, I put this slide up here because, well, people are accredited and buildings are certified, and it seems to be that these terms are used interchangeably, and those of you who want to become sustainable designers or want to get the LEED Green Associate probably ought to know the basic difference between those. Now, as I did before with Living Building Challenge and Passive House last week, I want to look at LEED from an integral perspective. And what you're seeing here is that the primary zone of categories here is up here in the upper right under Maximize Performance, which is perfectly wonderful and tends to be objectively measured. So LEED is really about proving the point through some sort of measurement and verification. So what ends up happening is the emphasis on systems is not as high as we would like to see, although systems are embedded in it. And certainly the idea of ethics and social equity are not there yet. And also beauty. How do you give a rating for beauty? So there is an unwritten ethical foundation to LEED, but it doesn't show up in the points. That's not really a criticism, it's just a fact of the way the system is designed. And certainly we don't see any points for aesthetics or sensory experience, which is different than Living Building Challenge, for example. So from an integral perspective, we're looking to fill in all 4 of those quadrants to create what we might say is a holistic, sustainable design project. Instead, LEED is really looking at being a high-performance building and site rating system, which I think is perfectly fine. And so this ends our short overview of the categories and the organization of LEED. We're going to be moving into a point-by-point detailed analysis of each credit within the LEED rating system. I'm sure you're really going to love it, and I'm sure you're going to just be riveted to your chair. I always remind you, for further information, you want to go look at the LEED website, and you certainly want to get the reference guide if you think you're going to be going for your LEED AP. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in one of the upcoming videos. Thank you.